Emma Chen had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed, but she wished she could be invisible instead. At 22, she worked as a junior accountant at Preston Holdings, one of the biggest companies in Dallas, Texas. Every morning, she arrived early to avoid the crowded elevators and ate lunch alone at her desk while reading mystery novels. Her coworkers barely knew her name, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Emma's cubicle sat in the corner of the accounting department on the 15th floor, tucked away from the main walkways where important people passed by. She had decorated it with a small cactus and a photo of her elderly grandmother, the only family she had left. Most days she could work for hours without anyone speaking to her, which suited her perfectly. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday morning in October. Emma arrived at the office at 7:30, a full hour before most people, and settled into her routine of reviewing expense reports. She was deep in concentration when the elevator doors opened and a group of men in expensive suits walked onto the floor. Talking loudly about quarterly profits and expansion plans, Emma glanced up briefly and recognized the tall man leading the group. Everyone in the building knew Jackson Preston, 35-year-old CEO who had inherited the company from his father. But what most people didn't know was that Jackson had grown up on a ranch in Montana and still spent his weekends there, away from the corporate world that had been thrust upon him. Jackson Preston was not what people expected from a millionaire CEO. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of time spent outdoors rather than behind a desk. His dark hair was always slightly unruly, as if he had just taken off a cowboy hat. And he wore his expensive suits like they were costumes he was forced to put on for a play he didn't want to be in. As the group passed Emma's corner, she heard Jackson coughing. It was a harsh, persistent cough that made her look up from her computer screen.
Hey, what she saw?
Made her heart skip a beat. Jackson's face was pale, almost gray, and there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested he was in pain. But what really caught her attention was the way he kept pressing his hand to his chest. Just over his heart, the other executives didn't seem to notice anything unusual. They were too busy discussing market projections and competitor analysis to pay attention to their boss's physical condition. Jackson nodded along with their conversation, but Emma could see that he was struggling to focus. Emma had read countless mystery novels where small details held the key to solving big problems. She had always been good at spotting patterns and inconsistencies, which made her excellent at her accounting work. Now, watching Jackson Preston, every instinct told her that something was seriously wrong. Over the next few days, Emma found herself paying closer attention to Jackson's comings and goings. It wasn't that she was interested in him romantically, she told herself. She was simply concerned about a fellow human being who seemed to be suffering in silence. She noticed that Jackson's cough was getting worse. She saw him pause at the top of stairs, breathing heavily after climbing just one flight. During meetings visible through glass conference room walls, she observed him loosening his tie frequently and dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Even though the office was kept at a comfortable temperature, most concerning of all, Emma noticed that Jackson's lips sometimes had a bluish tinge, especially after he had been walking quickly or talking for extended periods. She had researched this symptom online and didn't like what she had found. Emma's grandmother had died of heart problems 2 years earlier, and Emma had spent months learning about cardiovascular disease during those final weeks. She recognized the signs that everyone else was missing or choosing to ignore. The problem was that Emma had never spoken directly to Jackson Preston in the 3 years she had worked for his company. The idea of approaching him with her concerns seemed impossible. What if she was wrong? What if he thought she was crazy or overstepping her boundaries? What if she embarrassed herself and lost her job? But as the days passed, Jackson's condition seemed to be deteriorating. Emma watched him during a company meeting, streamed live to all employees, and saw him grip the podium tightly while speaking. His breathing seemed labored, and at one point he had to pause mid-sentence to catch his breath, covering it by taking a drink of water. After the meeting, Emma overheard 2 senior managers discussing Jackson's performance. "He seemed off his game today," one of them said. "Maybe he's just stressed about the Henderson acquisition. Maybe he's been partying too hard on those weekend trips to his ranch," The other replied with a laugh. Rich boys and their toys, you know? Emma felt a surge of frustration. These men worked closely with Jackson every day, but they were completely oblivious to the fact that their boss might be seriously ill. They saw his symptoms as signs of stress or lifestyle choices, not as potential medical emergencies. That evening, Emma stayed late at the office, long after everyone else had gone home. She sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, but she wasn't working on spreadsheets. Instead, she was researching everything she could find about heart disease, its symptoms, and the dangers of leaving it untreated. The more she read, the more convinced she became that Jackson Preston was in serious trouble. The combination of symptoms she had observed, the progressive worsening of his condition, the fact that he was clearly trying to hide his illness, all pointed to a potentially life-threatening situation. Emma knew she had to do something. She had no idea how. She couldn't just walk up to one of the most powerful men in Dallas and tell him she thought he was having heart problems. She couldn't call his personal assistant and request a meeting to discuss his health. She was just a junior accountant, whom he had probably never even noticed. But as Emma gathered her things to leave the empty office, she made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She was going to find a way to help Jackson Preston, even if it meant stepping far outside her comfort zone and risking everything she had worked for. Sometimes, Emma realized, being the person who notices things others miss comes with a responsibility. To act on that knowledge, no matter how terrifying it might be. Emma spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment and trying to figure out how to approach Jackson Preston. By morning, she had rejected dozens of ideas as either too bold, too inappropriate, or too likely. To result in her immediate termination, she arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping to catch Jackson alone before the office filled with people. But as she sat in her cubicle watching the elevator doors, her courage began to fade. Every time she thought about actually speaking to him, her palms grew sweaty and her heart raced around 9 o'clock. Emma's supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, approached, her desk with a stack of expense reports. Emma, I need you to review these for the executive floor. There are some discrepancies in the travel expenses that need to be clarified before the board meeting next week. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she took the reports. The top folder was labeled Jackson Preston, Executive Travel Expenses. This was it. The opportunity she had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma said quietly, should I take these directly to Mr. Preston's office if I have questions? Her supervisor looked surprised. Emma had never volunteered to interact with executives before. Well, normally you would go through his assistant, Margaret. But if the issues are complex, you might need to speak with him directly. Emma spent the next 2 hours carefully reviewing Jackson's expense reports, looking for legitimate discrepancies she could use as a reason to request a meeting. What she found was actually quite interesting. Jackson's travel expenses showed frequent trips to a small town in Montana called Cedar Ridge, but the expenses were categorized as business trips rather than personal travel. More intriguingly, many of these trips coincided with dates when Jackson had called in sick to the office. Emma cross-referenced the dates with company records and found a pattern that painted a very different picture from the one Jackson's colleagues had of his weekend ranch activities. Armed with this information and a heart beating so fast, she thought it might jump out of her chest, Emma made her way to the executive floor. Margaret, Jackson's assistant, was a stern woman in her 50s who guarded access to her boss like a dragon protecting treasure. Excuse me, Ms. Margaret, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm Emma Chen from accounting. I have some questions about Mr. Preston's travel expense reports that I think he should address personally. Margaret looked at Emma over her reading glasses with obvious skepticism. Mr. Preston is very busy preparing for the Henderson acquisition. Can't you handle this through normal channels? I tried. But there are some irregularities that could potentially create problems with the IRS if they're not properly documented, Emma said, surprised by her own boldness in invoking potential tax issues. Margaret's expression sharpened. Tax problems were serious business, and she knew better than to dismiss them. Very well. Mr. Preston has 15 minutes before his next meeting. Make it quick. Emma's legs felt like rubber as she followed Margaret to Jackson's corner office. The space was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Dallas. But Emma barely noticed the expensive furniture or prestigious artwork. Her attention was focused entirely on Jackson, who was sitting behind his massive desk, looking even more tired and pale than she had observed from a distance. "Mr. Preston," Margaret announced, "this is Emma Chen from accounting. She has some questions about your travel expenses." Jackson looked up from the documents he was reviewing, and Emma felt her breath catch. Up close, she could see dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands. His skin had an unhealthy pallor, and she noticed that his breathing seemed shallow and rapid. "Miss Chen," Jackson said, his voice hoarse from the persistent cough she had been observing. "Please have a seat. What can I help you with?" Emma sat down in the chair across from his desk, clutching the expense reports like a lifeline. "Mr. Preston, I was reviewing your travel expenses for the past 6 months. I noticed some patterns that might need clarification." She opened the first folder and spread out the documents, pointing to the dates and locations. "You have numerous trips to Cedar Ridge, Montana, categorized as business expenses, but I couldn't find corresponding business activities or meetings in that area." Jackson's expression grew guarded. "Those are legitimate business trips, Miss Chen. I meet with agricultural suppliers and land management companies in that region." Emma had expected this response. She pulled out another set of documents. "I understand, Mr. Preston, but these trips often coincide with days when you were marked as sick leave in the company records. It creates a discrepancy that could raise questions during an audit." For a moment, Jackson was silent, and Emma could see him calculating how to respond. But then something unexpected happened. A violent coughing fit seized him, and Emma watched in alarm as his face turned red and then almost blue before he managed to catch his breath. "Mr. Preston, are you all right?" Emma asked, half-rising from her chair. Jackson waved her back down, reaching for a glass of water on his desk. "I'm fine," he gasped. "It's just a persistent cold." But Emma had seen too much to accept that explanation. The bluish tinge around his lips, the way he pressed his hand to his chest, the exhaustion that seemed to emanate from him, all confirmed her worst fears. "Mr. Preston," Emma said, her voice stronger now because concern had overcome her shyness, "I don't think you have a cold." Jackson's eyes sharpened, and Emma saw a flash of something that might have been fear. "Miss Chen, I appreciate your concern, but my health is not part of your accounting responsibilities." "You're right," Emma agreed. "But as someone who spent months watching my grandmother struggle with heart disease, I recognize the symptoms you're displaying." The room fell completely silent. Jackson stared at Emma, and she could see him trying to decide whether to be angry at her presumption or relieved that someone had finally noticed what he had been trying so hard to hide. "Those trips to Montana," Emma continued, her voice gentle but determined, "they're not for business meetings, are they? You're going there because it's where you feel safe, where you can rest without anyone expecting you to perform or pretend everything is normal." Jackson's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "Miss Chen, you don't understand the pressures of running a company this size. I can't afford to appear weak or unreliable." "But you can't afford to collapse during a board meeting either," Emma replied. "And from what I can see, that's where this is heading if you don't get medical attention soon." Jackson leaned back in his chair, and Emma could see the exhaustion and fear he had been hiding from everyone else. "But even if you're right," he said quietly, "what do you suggest I do? Take medical leave and watch the Henderson acquisition fall apart? Let hundreds of employees lose their jobs because their CEO couldn't handle the stress?" Emma realized that Jackson Preston, for all his wealth and power, was trapped by the very success that everyone envied. He couldn't admit weakness because too many people depended on him appearing strong and in control. "Mr. Preston," Emma said, leaning forward in her chair, "what good are you to your employees if you're dead?" Jackson's face went completely white at Emma's blunt words, and for a moment she thought she had gone too far. But then he slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. And she realized that someone finally saying what he had been afraid to think had actually been a relief. "I've been having chest pains for 3 months," Jackson admitted, his voice muffled by his hands, and shortness of breath. I keep telling myself it's just stress, but deep down I know it's more than that. Emma felt her heart breaking for this man who carried so much responsibility that he couldn't even take care of his own health. "Have you seen a doctor at all?" Jackson raised his head, and Emma saw exhaustion and fear in his eyes that no amount of money could fix. "I went to my family doctor 6 weeks ago. He said my blood pressure was elevated and recommended some tests. But the Henderson acquisition was entering a critical phase, and I kept postponing the appointment." "Dr. Preston, you need to see a cardiologist immediately," Emma said firmly. "The symptoms you're experiencing could indicate a serious heart condition that requires treatment." "I can't," Jackson said, standing up and walking to his window. "The board meeting is in 4 days. They suspect I'm having health problems. They could lose confidence in my leadership. The Henderson deal is worth $2 billion and could save this company's future." Emma watched him standing there, looking out over the city he was trying so hard to serve, and understood that Jackson Preston was a prisoner of his own success and sense of duty. "What if there was a way to get you medical attention without anyone knowing?" Emma asked quietly. Jackson turned around, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "What do you mean?" Emma took a deep breath, knowing she was about to suggest something that could either save his life or cost her everything. "I have a friend from college who's a nurse practitioner, specializes in cardiology and works at Methodist Hospital. She owes me a favor, and I think she would be willing to see you privately, maybe even outside normal office hours." "You would do that for me?" Jackson asked, surprise evident in his voice. "But why? You barely know me." Emma stood up, gathering the expense reports that had brought her to his office. "Because everyone deserves to have someone who notices when they're in trouble. And because I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you when I might have been able to help prevent it." Jackson studied Emma's face. She could see him trying to understand this quiet accountant who had somehow seen through his carefully constructed facade. "What's your friend's name?" "Dr. Lisa Park. She's brilliant and discreet. She works at the cardiac unit at Methodist Hospital, but she also does private consultations for executives who need confidential medical care." "You think she would see me?" Emma nodded. "I'll call her this afternoon and explain the situation. If you're willing, we could arrange something for this evening, after regular office hours." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with his pride and his fear. Finally he nodded. "All right, Miss Chen, make the call." That afternoon, Emma sat at her desk with sweaty palms, dialing Lisa Park's number. Lisa had been her roommate in college, and they had remained close friends despite their different career paths. Emma knew that Lisa specialized in helping people with heart problems, and she also knew that Lisa understood the importance of discretion when dealing with high-profile patients. "Emma." Lisa's voice was warm and familiar. "So good to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm well, Lisa, but I'm calling because I need a huge favor. There's someone at my company who I think is having serious heart problems, but he can't seek medical attention through normal channels because of confidentiality concerns." Lisa's tone became more serious. "Emma, what kind of symptoms are we talking about?" Emma described everything she had observed about Jackson's condition over the past weeks, including the chest pains and shortness of breath he had admitted to. Lisa listened without interrupting, and Emma could hear her taking notes. "Emma, based on what you're describing, this person needs medical attention immediately. These symptoms could indicate anything from severe hypertension to an impending heart attack." "I know," Emma said. "That's why I'm calling you. Is there any way you could see him privately? He's willing to pay any fee necessary, and he understands the seriousness of the situation now. Can you bring him to my private office this evening around 8 o'clock? I have a small practice separate from the hospital where I handle confidential cases like this." Emma felt relief wash over her. "Lisa, you're amazing. Yes, I'll arrange it." When Emma returned to Jackson's office that evening, she found him still at his desk, working despite the late hour. He looked up when she knocked, and she could see that the conversation from earlier had been weighing on his mind. "Dr. Park can see you at 8 o'clock, Emma reported. "Her private office is on Medical City Drive, about 20 minutes from here." Jackson saved his work and reached for his suit jacket. "Miss Chen, I want you to know that I understand the risk you're taking by getting involved in this situation. If word gets out that you are helping me with personal medical issues, it could affect your career here. Mr. Preston, I'm more concerned about your health than my career, Emma replied honestly. As they rode down in the elevator together, Emma noticed that Jackson seemed nervous in a way she had never seen before. As a man who commanded boardrooms and made decisions involving millions of dollars was afraid of what a doctor might tell him about his heart. What if she confirms what we both suspect? Jackson asked, as they walked through the parking garage to his car. What if I really am having heart problems that require immediate treatment? Emma stopped walking and turned to face him. Then you get the treatment you need. You trust that the people around you can handle things while you recover. Mr. Preston, you've built an incredible company with talented people. They can keep things running while you take care of yourself. Jackson unlocked his car, a modest sedan that surprised Emma, who had expected something more flashy. You know, Ms. Chen, in all my years of running this company, no one has ever spoken to me as directly as you have today. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Emma asked, suddenly worried that she had been too presumptuous. Jackson smiled for the first time since she had met him. It's a very good thing. I've been surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear for so long that I'd forgotten what honest conversation sounds like. As they drove through the Dallas traffic toward Dr. Park's office, Emma reflected on how much her life had changed in just one day. This morning, she had been the invisible accountant in the corner cubicle. Tonight, she was sitting in a car with one of the most powerful men in the city, helping him face what might be the most important decision of his life. She glanced over at Jackson, who was gripping the steering wheel tightly and breathing in shallow, careful breaths. Emma realized that despite all his wealth and success, he was just as human and vulnerable as anyone else. The thought made her more determined than ever to make sure he got the help he needed. Dr. Lisa Park's private office was located in a quiet medical building away from the bustle of the main hospital. Emma and Jackson arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, and Lisa met them at the door personally. She was a petite woman in her early 30s, with kind eyes and an immediately reassuring presence. You must be Mr. Preston, Lisa said, extending her hand. Emma has told me about your symptoms, and I appreciate you coming in this evening. Jackson shook her hand, and Emma could see some of his tension ease at Lisa's professional but warm demeanor. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Dr. Park. I understand this is unusual. Not as unusual as you might think, Lisa replied, leading them into her consultation room. I work with many executives who need confidential medical care. The important thing is that you're here now. Emma started to excuse herself to wait in the outer office, but Lisa stopped her. Emma, if it's all right with Mr. Preston, I'd like you to stay. You've been observing his symptoms longer than anyone, and your observations could be valuable. Jackson nodded his agreement. Though Emma could see he was nervous about what the examination might reveal, Lisa began with a detailed interview, asking Jackson about his symptoms, their duration, and any triggers he had noticed. Jackson answered honestly, describing chest pains that had been worsening over the past 3 months, a shortness of breath that occurred even with minimal exertion, and fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to relieve. Mr. Preston, have you had any family history of heart disease? Lisa asked as she prepared her equipment. My father died of a heart attack at 58, Jackson admitted, but he was overweight and smoked heavily. I've tried to take better care of myself. Lisa nodded, making notes. Genetic factors can be significant, but you're right that lifestyle makes a big difference. Let's do some basic tests and see what we're dealing with. Emma watched as Lisa conducted a thorough examination. She checked Jackson's blood pressure, which was dangerously elevated, listened to his heart and lungs, and performed an EKG to assess his heart rhythm. As the examination progressed, Emma could see Lisa's expression becoming more concerned. She exchanged glances with Emma that suggested the situation was indeed serious. Mr. Preston, Lisa said finally, I need to be very direct with you. Your blood pressure is extremely high, and the EKG shows some abnormalities that suggest your heart is under significant stress. Jackson's face went pale. What does that mean exactly? It means you're at high risk for a heart attack or stroke, Lisa said gently but firmly. The symptoms Emma observed and described to me, combined with what I'm seeing in these tests, indicate that you need immediate cardiac intervention. How immediate? Jackson asked, his voice tight with fear. Lisa pulled up a chair and sat down. Facing Jackson and Emma, Mr. Preston, I'm recommending that you go to the hospital tonight for a complete cardiac workup. You need a cardiac catheterization to determine if there are blockages in your coronary arteries, and depending on what they find, you may need surgical intervention. Emma watched Jackson process this information, seeing the conflict between his fear for his health and his concern for his business responsibilities. Dr. Park, is there any way this can wait until after my board meeting on Friday? Jackson asked. It's an extremely important meeting that could determine the future of my company. Lisa's expression grew stern. Mr. Preston, I understand that you have important business obligations, but I need you to understand something. Based on what I'm seeing, you could have a fatal heart attack at any time. The stress of a high-stakes board meeting could literally kill you. Emma felt her stomach clench with fear. She had known Jackson was sick, but hearing a medical professional confirm that he could die was terrifying. What if we compromise? Surprising herself with her boldness. What if Mr. Preston goes to the hospital tomorrow for the cardiac workup, and depending on what they find, we figure out a way to handle the board meeting? Lisa considered this. That's better than waiting until Friday, but Mr. Preston, you need to understand that if the tests show what I suspect they will, you're going to need immediate treatment. There won't be any more postponing. Jackson was quiet for several minutes, staring at his hands. Emma could see him struggling with the reality of his situation. I do have blocked arteries, he said finally. What kind of treatment are we talking about? Depending on the severity and location of the blockages, you might need angioplasty, which involves opening the blocked arteries with a balloon and possibly inserting stents. In more severe cases, you might need bypass surgery. Recovery take? For angioplasty, you could be back to light duties in a week, full duties in a month. For bypass surgery, you're looking at several months of recovery time. Jackson put his head in his hands. Dr. Park, this company employs over 3,000 people. The Henderson acquisition represents contracts and jobs that will sustain those families for years to come. I can't just abandon my responsibilities. Emma looked at this man who was literally willing to risk his life for his employees and felt her heart break a little more. She understood now why he had been hiding his symptoms and pushing through the pain. Mr. Preston, Emma said quietly, what would your employees say if they knew you were risking your life for them? You think they would want you to sacrifice your health for their jobs? Jackson looked up at her, and she could see tears in his eyes that he was fighting to hold back. Emma's right, Lisa added. And from a practical standpoint, if something happens to you during that board meeting, the acquisition will definitely fall apart, and it will be much worse for everyone involved. Jackson took a deep breath, and Emma could see him coming to a decision. All right, Dr. Park, I'll go to the hospital tomorrow for the tests. But I need both of you to understand that this has to remain completely confidential until we know what we're dealing with. Lisa nodded. Of course, I'll arrange for you to be seen at Methodist Hospital under a privacy protocol. They have procedures for high-profile patients who need discretionary care. As they prepared to leave, Lisa pulled Emma aside. Emma, I want you to know that you probably saved this man's life tonight. If he had continued ignoring these symptoms, the outcome could have been tragic. Emma felt a mixture of relief and continued worry. Lisa, what are the chances that the tests will show something serious? Lisa's expression was grave. Based on his symptoms, family history, and what I observed tonight, I'd say there's a very high probability that he has significant coronary artery disease. But the good news is that we caught it in time, and modern cardiac medicine can work miracles. If we act quickly. As Emma and Jackson rode back to the office parking garage where her car was waiting, the atmosphere in the car was heavy with unspoken fears and the weight of what they had learned. Ms. Chen, Jackson said as he pulled up next to her car, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've given me a chance to address this before it was too late. Mr. Preston, just promise me you'll follow through with the hospital appointment tomorrow, Emma replied. And please, call me Emma. Jackson smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Only if you'll call me Jackson. I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you? Emma felt herself blushing, but managed to smile back. I think you're right, Jackson. Emma barely slept that night, worrying about Jackson and what the hospital tests would reveal. She arrived at work early, hoping to catch word from him about the cardiac workup, but his office remained dark all morning. Who asked that Mr. Preston was handling some urgent business matters and wouldn't be available for meetings. Around noon, Emma's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Emma, it's Jackson, came the familiar voice, though it sounded strained and tired. I'm at Methodist Hospital. Dr. Park arranged everything, and they've been running tests all morning. Emma's heart raced. What have they found? There was a pause, and Emma could hear medical equipment beeping in the background. It's not good, Emma. The cardiac catheterization showed 3 major blockages in my coronary arteries. Dr. Martinez. The cardiologist here says I need emergency bypass surgery. Emma sank into her desk chair, feeling the weight of confirmation that Jackson's life was indeed in serious danger. When do they want to do the surgery? Tomorrow morning, Jackson said quietly. Dr. Martinez says waiting any longer would be extremely risky. He's actually amazed that I haven't already had a major heart attack. Jackson, I'm so sorry, but this is good news too, right? They caught it in time, and they can fix it? Yes, that's what they keep telling me. I triple bypass surgery. 4 hours in the operating room, and then several months of recovery. Jackson's voice grew heavy with worry. Emma, the board meeting is in 2 days. The Henderson acquisition deadline is next week. I don't know how to handle this. Emma could hear the panic in his voice, and she realized that Jackson was facing his worst fear, being unable to fulfill his responsibilities to his company and employees. Jackson, listen to me, Emma said firmly. Your health is the most important thing right now. Everything else can be figured out, but how? I can't just disappear without explanation, and I can't reveal my medical condition without potentially sabotaging the acquisition. Emma thought quickly, her mind working through the problem like she would approach a complex accounting issue. What if we said you had to make an emergency trip to Montana? Some kind of urgent issue with your ranch that requires your immediate attention? I could work for a few days, but not for months of recovery, Jackson replied. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Emma said. Right now, we just need to get you through the surgery safely. That evening, Emma did something she had never imagined herself doing. She drove to Methodist Hospital to visit Jackson before his surgery. She found him in a private room, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital gown, connected to monitors that tracked his heart rhythm and blood pressure. Emma, Jackson said, his face lighting up when she walked in. I can't believe you came. Of course I came, Emma replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. How are you feeling? Scared, Jackson admitted honestly. I've never had surgery before, and Dr. Martinez explained all the risks involved. There's a small chance I might not wake up, Emma. Emma felt tears prick her eyes at his words. Over the past few days, this man had gone from being a distant CEO to someone she genuinely cared about. You're going to be fine, she said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. You're strong, and you have the best medical team in Dallas taking care of you. Jackson squeezed her hand back, and Emma noticed how cold his fingers were. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I know it's a huge favor. Anything, Emma said without hesitation. If something happens to me during the surgery, I need someone. To make sure the Henderson acquisition goes through, not for my sake, but for the employees. There are detailed plans in my office safe, and Margaret has the combination. Jackson, nothing is going to happen to you, Emma said firmly. But if it does, Jackson insisted, will you promise me you'll help make sure the company continues? You understand the financial aspects better than most people, and you've shown that you're not afraid to do what needs to be done. Emma looked at this man who was facing life-threatening surgery and was still worried about other people's welfare. I promise, Jackson. But you're going to be there to handle it yourself. They talked for another hour about the company, about Jackson's childhood on the Montana ranch, and about Emma's own dreams and ambitions. Emma discovered that Jackson was nothing like the remote corporate executive she had imagined. He was thoughtful, caring, and deeply committed to the people who depended on him. You know, Jackson said as visiting hours were ending, before this week? I thought success meant never showing weakness, never needing help from anyone. But you've shown me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help when it's offered. Emma stood to leave, but Jackson caught her hand again. Emma, when I get through this surgery, I want to offer you a position as my assistant vice president of finance. You have insights and courage that this company needs, and I think you're wasting your talents in that corner cubicle.
Emma's
Widened with surprise. Jackson, I don't know what to say. That's an incredible opportunity, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a position. Emma, you noticed something that could have saved my life when no one else did. You had the courage to act on it, even though it meant stepping far outside your comfort zone. Those are exactly the qualities I need in my leadership team. Emma felt overwhelmed by his confidence in her abilities. Let's focus on getting you through tomorrow first. We can talk about career opportunities when you're recovered. Jackson smiled. Deal. But Emma, I want you to know that having you in my corner has made facing this surgery a lot less frightening. For the first time in months, I feel like someone actually sees me as a person, not just as a position or a responsibility. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office but found it impossible to concentrate on work. She kept checking her phone, hoping for news from the hospital. Around 10 o'clock, her phone finally rang with a call from Dr. Park. Emma, I wanted to give you an update on Jackson's surgery, Lisa said. He's been in the operating room for about 3 hours now, and everything is going according to plan. Emma spent the rest of the morning pacing around the office, making mistakes on simple calculations and jumping every time her phone made a sound. Her coworkers began to notice that something was wrong, but Emma couldn't explain her anxiety. Without revealing Jackson's situation, around 2 o'clock, Margaret approached Emma's desk with a concerned expression. Emma, I've had several board members calling about Mr. Preston's whereabouts. He was supposed to be in a conference call an hour ago and no one can reach him. Emma's heart pounded as she realized that Jackson's absence was starting to raise questions. Did you tell them he was handling the emergency in Montana? Yes, but they're getting suspicious. Mr. Henderson himself called and said he needs to speak with Mr. Preston today about some last-minute contract details. Before Emma could answer, her phone rang. It was Dr. Park again. Emma, I have wonderful news. Lisa's voice was filled with relief. Jackson's surgery was completely successful. Dr. Martinez found and bypassed all 3 blockages, and Jackson's heart is already showing improved blood flow. Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face. After Emma hung up, she realized that Margaret had been watching her reaction to the phone call. Margaret said quietly. Mr. Preston is in the hospital, isn't he? Emma looked at this woman who had been Jackson's loyal assistant for over 10 years and made another decision that would change everything.
Oh, Margaret.
If I tell you the truth, can I trust you to help me protect him?
What?
Margaret nodded without hesitation. I've been worried sick about him for weeks. I could see that something was wrong, but he kept insisting he was fine. Emma took a deep breath and told Margaret everything about Jackson's heart condition, the emergency surgery, and the need to keep his medical situation confidential until after the Henderson acquisition was complete. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail. When Emma finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. That explains so much, Margaret said finally. I've been watching him struggle for months, but I didn't know how to help. Emma, you probably saved his life. Right now, I need help saving his company, Emma replied. Can you help me figure out how to handle the board and the Henderson people until Jackson is recovered enough to make decisions? Margaret straightened in her chair, and Emma could see the loyal assistant transforming into a protective guardian. Emma, I've been managing Mr. Preston's schedule and communications for 10 years. Between the two of us, we can keep this company running until he's back on his feet. That evening, Emma walked into Jackson's intensive care room and barely recognized the man lying in the hospital bed. He was pale and surrounded by machines, with tubes and wires monitoring every aspect of his recovery. But when he heard her footsteps, his eyes opened and he managed a weak smile. Emma, he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed just hours earlier. You came. Of course I came, Emma said, taking the chair beside his bed. How do you feel? Like I've been hit by a truck, Jackson admitted. But Dr. Martinez says the surgery went perfectly. My heart is already getting better blood flow than it's had in months. Emma felt overwhelmed with relief. Jackson, I'm so glad you're okay. I was terrified all day. Emma, I need to know what's happening with the company. Have the board members been asking questions? Emma smiled at his predictable concern for business, even from his hospital bed. Margaret and I have everything under control, we've been telling everyone you're handling the emergency situation in Montana. And we've managed to postpone the critical meetings until next week. Jackson's eyebrows raised in surprise. You told Margaret about my surgery? I had to, Jackson. She was getting suspicious, and frankly, we need her help to keep things running while you recover. She's been covering for you brilliantly. Jackson nodded slowly. Margaret is incredibly loyal. She's helping, then I know the company is in good hands. Over the next 3 days, Emma found herself dividing her time between visiting Jackson in the hospital and working with Margaret to manage the increasingly complex web of postponed meetings and delayed communications. The Henderson acquisition deadline was looming. Several board members were growing impatient with Jackson's extended absence. On Friday morning, Emma arrived at Jackson's hospital room to find him sitting up in bed, looking significantly better than he had since the surgery. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing seemed much easier. Emma, I've been thinking, Jackson said as she settled into her usual chair. I need to come clean with the board about my surgery. Can't keep this charade going much longer, and they deserve to know the truth. Are you sure that's wise? Emma asked. What if it affects their confidence in the Henderson acquisition? Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering her concern. Emma, over the past week, you and Margaret have proven that this company can function even without me being physically present. Maybe it's time I trusted my team more and stopped thinking I have to handle everything personally. That afternoon, Jackson called an emergency video conference with the board of directors from his hospital room. Emma and Margaret, present to provide support and answer any questions about the company's operations during his absence. Ladies and gentlemen, Jackson began, his voice steady despite the hospital setting, I need to inform you of some personal circumstances that have affected my availability this week. He went on to explain his heart condition, the emergency surgery, and his prognosis for recovery. Emma watched the faces of the board members on the video screen, seeing surprise, concern, and in some cases, worry about the implications for the company. Mr. Preston, said Board Chairman Robert Hayes, while we're obviously concerned about your health, we need to address the immediate impact on the Henderson acquisition. The deadline is Monday, and there are still several critical decisions that need to be made. Jackson looked at Emma, and she could see him making a decision that would change both their lives. Mr. Hayes, I'd like to introduce you to Emma Chen, who has been serving as my acting financial advisor during this crisis. Emma has been instrumental in maintaining our operations, and I'm recommending that she be given authority to represent the company in the final Henderson negotiations. Emma's heart stopped. She had never imagined being thrust into such a high-stakes situation, but as she looked around the room at the faces of some of the most powerful business leaders in Dallas, she felt a strange sense of calm. Ms. Chen, Robert Hayes said, are you prepared to take on this responsibility? Emma thought about the shy accountant she had been just a week earlier, hiding in her corner cubicle and avoiding attention. Then she looked at Jackson, who was watching her with complete confidence in his eyes. Yes, Mr. Hayes, Emma said clearly. I'm prepared. The next 72 hours were the most intense of Emma's life. Working closely with Margaret and consulting with Jackson by phone, she navigated the final details of the Henderson acquisition. Her accounting background proved invaluable in understanding the financial implications of each decision, and her attention to detail helped identify several potential problems that could have derailed the deal. On Monday afternoon, Emma sat in the Preston Holdings conference room, surrounded by lawyers, executives, and Henderson Company representatives. As she signed the final documents that would complete the $2 billion acquisition, she thought about how far she had traveled from that corner cubicle. That evening, Emma returned to the hospital to find Jackson sitting in a chair by the AE window, looking more like his old self than she had seen him in months. Emma, I heard the news, Jackson said, his face glowing with pride and gratitude. The acquisition went through flawlessly. You did something I'm not sure I could have done even if I had been healthy. Emma sat down across from him, feeling the exhaustion of the past week finally catching up with her. I couldn't have done it without your guidance and Margaret's support. We made a good team. Emma, we need to talk about your future with the company, Jackson said seriously. That assistant vice president position I mentioned is still available. But after seeing what you accomplished this week, I think we need to aim higher. Emma looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? Man, I want you to be my chief financial officer. You've proven that you have the intelligence, courage, and integrity to handle major responsibility. More importantly, you've shown that you understand what this company really stands for. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes.
6 months
ago, she had been struggling to pay her rent on her small accountant's salary. Now she was being offered one of the most important positions in a major corporation. Jackson, I don't know if I'm ready for such a big role. Jackson reached over and took her hand, the same gesture that had become familiar during their hospital conversations. Emma, a week ago you noticed something that no one else saw, and you had the courage to act on it, even though it could have cost you everything. That's exactly the kind of person I want helping me run this company. Emma looked out the hospital window at the Dallas skyline, thinking about all the people working in those buildings who depended on companies like Preston Holdings for their livelihoods. She thought about Jackson, recovering from surgery, but still focused on taking care of his employees. And she thought about the shy, invisible accountant she had been, who had discovered that sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up when you notice something others have missed. All right, Jackson, Emma said finally. I accept. 6 months later, Emma Chen Morrison sat in her spacious office on the executive floor of Preston Holdings, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed the company's continued growth following the successful Henderson acquisition. Through a window, she could see the corner cubicle where she used to work, now occupied by another quiet accountant who reminded her of herself. The nameplate on her desk read Emma Morrison, a Chief Financial Officer, a title that still amazed her sometimes. But it was the wedding ring on her finger that made her smile the most. Jackson had proposed 3 months earlier, not from obligation or gratitude, but from the love that had grown between them through shared challenges and mutual respect. Jackson appeared in her doorway, looking healthy and strong, his heart surgery. Now just a memory marked by regular checkups and a commitment to better work-life balance. Ready to go home, Mrs. Morrison? He asked, using the title that never failed to make her heart skip a beat. Ready when you are, Mr. Morrison, Emma replied, gathering her things. As they walked to the elevator together, Emma reflected on how a single moment of courage in noticing what others had missed had changed not just Jackson's life, but her own. Sometimes she had learned the most important thing you can do is trust your instincts and speak up, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared,